So we have a few new people, no? People who were not there this afternoon, people who are new. So would you put your hands up? Yes. I was not there this afternoon. And also also, how many of you from this group are familiar with the teachings of Buddhism or a little bit? How many of you are familiar with the teachings of Buddhism? Or maybe another, how many of you are familiar? Or another way of saying, who are completely new, who do not know very much about the teachings? And tell me, how long am I supposed to go on?
Long.
We fall asleep when it starts to get boring.
Huh?
We fall asleep when we get too much.
Then I leave. If that's the case, I leave before it gets boring. No, the schedule is until what time? Not written.
Yeah, after 10:30.
All right. Okay, so I just wanted to ask people who are here now, what is the theme of this evening? Huh? What about?
Teachings of Tantra in the West.
Teaching of
The
Tantra.
relevance of the Tantric Buddhist teachings of Tibet to the West.
Ah, yes, the relevance of it to the West. Now, actually, it's very difficult to talk about the Tantric Buddhist tradition of Tibet without actually giving a background to the teaching. We cannot speak about it like a heart or the head without the body. And but however you expect me to do so. But I need to say a little bit, is that first of all, I mean, you see, Buddha in his infinite wisdom and compassion taught many, many different ways, innumerable different ways, in order to make people understand or look into or realize their true nature and the nature of, you can call, reality of life. You understand? In fact, quite extraordinary thing is Buddha did not teach one doctrine. In fact, he taught. It is said traditionally he taught in 84,000 different ways. But when we boil them down, they fall in a category of three, known as three yanas. Now, yana, by the way, is not Dutch. It is becoming Dutch. Quite a few yanas on the bicycles. Yana means actually vehicle. It's a Sanskrit word, which means vehicle. Vehicle means it's a way, a support, means whereby someone could evolve spiritually. So, there's bicycle yana, motorbike yana, and car yana. These are the three yanas. I need to crack a few jokes in order to wake myself up. It's only for my purpose, not for you, because it's in terrible taste. But you must forgive me, because last night I had only 2 hours sleep. And so I was in Paris teaching there, and it became very late. And this morning I had to get up extremely early to come here. So, you understand? The 3 yanas. They are fundamentally known as, in fact, if you elaborate them, they become 9. But first, let's simplify and talk of the 3 yanas. They are generally known, because they come originally from, you see, like in Holland, you have Dutch name, isn't it? Isn't it? You have Dutch name in Holland? Isn't it? Yeah. So also when he comes from India, you're Indian name. So that's why, we don't have problem with Paris. We don't have cultural problem with London, the name. So in the same manner, it's called Hinayana, Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, which is sometimes known as Tantrayana, The Tantra is the third one, it's called Vajrayana. Now the Hinayana, actually Hina means lesser, Yana means the vehicle, but actually from some of the most profound traditions of Tibetan teachings, for example a tradition called Dzogchen, from those traditions we do not call the Hinayana, we call it the fundamental Yana. Because in fact without the Hinayana, without the fundamental Yana, there won't be other Yanas. Without the basis of the first teaching, without one there won't be 2, and so on. So that the first teachings, you see, that's why we should not look upon them. When you come to the higher teachings, you must not look upon at the so-called the lower teachings. In fact, they're not lower at all. They're really the basis, the foundation. Even though the foundation of the house is the lower, but it's the very basis on which the house is built. Clear? That's the Hinayana or fundamental Yana, which is now becoming what's called Theravada tradition, as practiced in Sri Lanka, Burma, many of the countries, the practice of shamatha and vipassana, you understand? And then there is the Mahayana, which is the greater vehicle, or sometimes known as the Bodhisattva Yana. And then there is the Vajrayana. Now, if I were to essentialize this in a very simple way, when Buddha was asked to essentialize his teachings, by the way, maybe some of you are new today, are hearing this word called, Buddha. Okay? Now you're hearing something called Dharma. What is Dharma? Dharma is actually, we don't use in Buddhism the word religion. Dharma is the teaching of the Buddha, is known as the Dharma. But actually, Dharma has a deeper meaning. Dharma means, in fact, on a fundamental level, on an absolute level, that Dharma is the nature, inherent nature of everything is Dharma. The Dharma is the truth that resides or that is in everything is the Dharma. You understand that Dharma? So the truth itself is the Dharma. You understand? Like for example, the truth of the wisdom of the mind of the Buddha is the Dharma. That's why in the Buddhist teachings it's called Dharmakaya, when you reach to that level of realization. But then also Dharma is a way, is a means. That is to say, for those of us who have lost the way, in a sense, to bring us back to the truth. The way, the means of bringing, that is the Dharma. You understand? So Dharma is actually more than a religion. It's actually a spiritual way. That's why all these vehicles are within the fold of the Dharma. So in the Buddha Dharma, when Buddha was asked to essentialize his teaching, he said, Dikpacham Mijachin Gyawapun Sopache, Rang Semyon Sundundun Sanjit Dembani. That, by the way, is in Tibetan, as you may have gathered. That means the Dikpacham Mijachin means to do no harm whatsoever, or rather, there are two different translations. One translation is to do no harm whatsoever, or commit not a single unwholesome action. That's number one. The second is cultivate well to virtue, or to do good to perfection. That's another, two different translations. And the last one statement is, and to train or to subjugate, to understand, or our mind, train our mind in its entirety, completely. This is Buddha Dharma. So, in fact, it boils down to not harming, helping, you see, commit not single unwholesome action, not doing unwholesome, harmful actions, and cultivating a wealth of virtue, and working with mind. This is in fact the essence of all the teachings of the Buddha. And particularly if you relate them to the three yanas. Now I can safely use the word yana, no? You understand yana? All right? If I safely use the word yana, that it is related to the first, not harming, sometimes known as the compassion of not harming. The first, to do no harm whatsoever, or commit not a single unwholesome action, is related to the first yana. Cultivate the wealth of virtue is related to Mahayana. And the subjugate, the work with the mind in its entirety, is Vajrayana. Even though working with the mind is something that is very much the focal point and the emphasis and the point in all the yanas, but it is something, especially the field of Vajrayana, or Tantra. But in that you see the first, when you come to the first level of the first yana, is involved, if I put it very simply, it involves the practice of meditation. Meditation, that is to say, bringing our mind home, and you see, allowing our mind, the confused mind, to settle in the state of peace. So this particular practice is called fundamental practice of mindfulness, which brings about what is known as the peaceful remaining, or the calm abiding. And that in Sanskrit is called shamatha, in Tibetan shine, which in English is calm abiding or peaceful remaining. And from out of that, the calm abiding or peaceful remaining, comes the clear seeing of vipassana, the clear insight dawns. You see, these are the two basic trainings. And through that what happens, one realizes through meditation that so-called ego is inherently non-existent. That one realizes in one's meditation practice. So that in fact the ultimate view is the wisdom of egolessness. And in fact the main thing that is accomplished in the first jnana is actually, as I was mentioning this morning to the people, do you have the text with you there? I could maybe very simply accomplish this by reading it. Just the passages. Very much. So See, the practice of mindfulness of bringing the scattered mind home, and so of bringing the different aspect of our being into focus, is called the peacefully remaining, or calm abiding. Peacefully remaining accomplishes three things. First of all, the fragmented aspect of ourselves which had been at war with each other, settle and dissolve. Dissolve, that sounds very Dutch, isn't it? And becoming more like dissolve, dissolve, and, what you say, and become friends. In that settling, we begin to understand ourselves more, and sometimes even have glimpses of the radiance of a fundamental nature. Secondly, the practice of mindfulness diffuses our negativity and aggression and turbulent emotions which may have been gathering power over many lifetimes. Rather than suppressing emotion or indulging in them, there is an important, you see, in them here it is important to view them, your thoughts and whatever arises, with an acceptance and a generosity that are as open and spacious as possible. Tibetan master said that this wise generosity has the flavor of boundless space and so warm and cozy that you feel enveloped and protected by it as if by a rich blanket of sunlight. Then gradually, as you remain open and mindful and use one of the techniques of meditation practice, you see, then what happens is this, more and more your negativity will slowly be diffused and you begin to feel well in your own being. And from this comes a deep release and ease. And I think of this practice as like the ultimate therapy, the most effective form of self-healing. Thirdly, the practice unveils and reveals your essential good heart, because it dissolves and removes the unkindness or the harm in you. Only when we have removed the harm in ourselves do we become truly useful to others. Through the practice, then, by slowly removing the unkindness and harm from ourselves, we allow our good heart, the fundamental goodness, and the kindness which are our real nature to shine out and become the warm climate in which our true being flowers. You will see why now I call meditation the true practice of peace, the true practice of non-aggression, the non-violence, and the real and the greatest practice of disarmament, inner disarmament. So you see, through this practice, it removes the harm, the negativity. Now you understand? Pacifies, brings the peace in our mind. That's why when you look at many of the images of these monks, meditating and walking meditation, there's a sense of really peace and tranquility about them. Is that clear? Then what it removes is, as I mentioned to you, it removes the unkindness and reveals what? The goodness and the good heart and the fundamental goodness. And this fundamental goodness, which is seen as the first glimpse of our Buddha nature, is then enhanced and worked with through the practice of compassion, which is the next practice, which is related to the second vehicle called Mahayana. Is this clear? And that in fact it's very interesting in Buddhism, the fundamental that compassion. Is it in any way possible to open some windows at the risk of, I think it's really, it's not possible. Okay. I think that's very good to have some. Okay. Good. Thank you. So where are we? Or where were we? Compassion. That. In fact, what I was just saying when we were about to open the window. Is that the word that is used in Buddhism to describe a fundamental compassion is the word is bodhicitta. Bodhi is actually your enlightened essence. It's the stuff that Buddha is made of. It's the seed of enlightenment. In fact, from the bodhi comes Buddha. Somebody who realizes the Buddha is Buddha. Remember this afternoon I was compared to like Tibet is like a bodhi Tibetans, like, I don't know, it doesn't compare so well, but anyway, something like that. So therefore, the Bodhi is your enlightened essence. Is that clear? The Chitta means heart. So Bodhicitta is the heart of enlightenment. In fact, on a more profound level, compassion is seen as not merely a kind of, a noble feeling or a sentiment, a human kind of, a noble human sentiment. It is seen as being no other than the fundamental radiance of the nature of your mind. When we really come to discover our enlightened nature, the Bodhi, that its radiance, just as when the sun shines, it has the natural warmth and the rays. That kind of the warmth and the rays and the light of the sun is very much the bodhicitta. Is that clear? And that practice is, you work with that in order to, heal ourselves. Heal ourselves and heal our relationship and heal our, and heal our kind of, human relationship. In fact, the Bodhisattva part is quite extraordinary. In fact, one of the most important practices in that is the practice of giving and receiving. Giving by means of love, taking by means of compassion. Doesn't mean you take the money or, doesn't mean that. It is what you mean, you take on the suffering of others by means of compassion and give your well-being through the love to others. Anyway, if I go on talking about that, maybe the whole talk will be on that. And I'm happy to say that I've been kind of threatening you for the last few years that I'm writing this book and it's now finally done. Almost. It's the final corrections. In fact, it's going to press at the end of this month. And in that one, there is a very strong chapter on compassion, which covers all this. In fact, the book has 22 chapters. It covers the life and it covers death, everything. I really wrote that with the, in fact, it's the kind of the quintessence of the teachings of all my masters. And I put it in a kind of a language and a kind of a way so that it's accessible for, everyone who has an open mind and heart. It doesn't have to be a Buddhist to read that book. In fact, better if I'm not a Buddhist. No. Actually, what is also very interesting is for Buddhist practitioners, it's very, very good for their own practice. In fact, actually, some of my students who've been studying, for example, Dzogchen with me for years, they've had many, many materials on Dzogchen. When they got this book, the chapter special on the nature mind, they found that to be perhaps the most inspiring material they've ever had before. And so anyway, in that one I write about compassion more fully, about meditation. The meditation chapter is known as Bringing the Mind Home. That also I speak about the nature mind, which is really the most important thing in Buddhism, is realizing nature mind. So that I hope in future you will have the opportunity. In fact, I think we will also publish it here in Holland. In Dutch, of course. I speak fluently. Actually, I don't speak in Dutch, but I write fluently. And so I don't know when it will appear in Holland, but the English edition is going to come out in America. It's going to be published in end of September. In England, it's going to be published in end of October with the Halloween weekend connected with that. And that in France it's going to appear next spring probably, and I don't know, also German, different places. The book is going to be entitled, this is the publisher they're calling it because after seeing the book they've given it the name, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. Actually that's what it is. The only thing is I didn't so much like Tibetan, because actually it's a book of living and dying. It's more than Tibetan. But Tibetan is good because there are so many such books these days that it takes away from the New Age level, transcends it. I always tease New Age people, I must tease. Especially with the Kosmos, we must tease them. They are wonderful things. Anyway, so that's why the editors, you see, should have. So in that one I speak only, because you see, in order, for example, for one to really practice or truly understand the tantric teachings, it is important to have really the basis of of meditation, to have really the, how do you say, understanding of the nature of mind through the training of the mindfulness, through the practice of shamatha, which is calm abiding, and through the, for example, the clear seeing or the insight of vipassana, these two, and then through developing training mind compassion, brings us, you see, brings one to the level of the understanding of the nature of mind. I know maybe some of you have had recently teachings from Rinpoche, who is actually one of the greatest masters, perhaps one of the most learned masters in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, one of them, and particularly in the Kagyu lineage or Kagyu school. He's probably the most prominent teacher. He had been giving teachings on the Buddha nature, and I think he's been speaking quite extensively. So has also Kretu Rinpoche from the Gelug tradition has also been teaching. So you've had really good dosage of teachings in that. But I don't know how many of you from here went to the teachings. Yeah. Anyway, so that's why they will always say that in order to really begin the practice of Tantra, that one must have, you see. Because you see, what we are, the main question that we are dealing tonight is what is the relevance, the benefit and the relevance of the Tantric teachings to the West. Is that not so? But in order to speak about the relevance of Tantra, first we have to say what Tantra is. And actually I said it this afternoon when I woke up. And you can play the tape. And I'll keep quiet. Now this afternoon was quite a good session from about 4 until 5. 4 until 4:45, 45 minutes. Within 45 minutes I essentialized the Tantra. Sometimes things come up very easily. In a very few words you can say things very clearly. I've said it clearly also, so those of you, it might be helpful that this afternoon tip, not the first part, from the 4 o'clock, that part, might be a useful reference to actually go over. However, I shall speak also directly, is that first of all, Tantra is, I hear this is the main title of this whole, you can call it this series of talks or conferences or seminars, workshops called Sense and Nonsense. Isn't it? Okay. Sense and nonsense. And there's a plenty of also, the Tantra is kind of, it's wonderful, but also there's a quite number of nonsense that's been made in the name of Tantra. Unfortunately. And Tantra has been highly misunderstood. What? Sometime in India, we call it the left-handed Tantra. When it's left-handed Tantra, is slightly hanky-panky Tantra is called left-handed Tantra. When you use that, the Tantra has a totally different meaning. That's why some people, when they use the word Tantra, they have a different meaning. That is why, unfortunately, but the Tantra, that's not the real meaning. So I have to be authentic, so I have to speak in the original language. Also to wake myself up with that. They actually should have fun all the time. One should not punish oneself by giving lectures to uninterested Dutch people. I'm just teasing you. Never say you must never take seriously what I say. Except follow. Anyway, so what I'm saying is this. It's also, you see, just as there are teachings for different people, see, there are also jokes for different people. Certain jokes work on certain people, like it worked really on. It was the most profound joke. Anyway, so jokes aside, so that you see that the actual, the real, if you put it, first let me do it very simply, then we slowly build. I was going to mention about, for example, For example, when you start talking about the meditation practice, which then through training of the practice of compassion, bring us to the realization of the, for example, the realization of egolessness, or the wisdom of egolessness, and the realization of shunyata, and the compassion are indivisible to the practice of Tantra. I was going to mention that, but at this particular point, it might not make so much sense. It just could be just words. So maybe a little bit later, as become appropriately, I shall bring those things in, okay? But first, since you want to know basically that the real, I mean, this is, I was saying also this afternoon, is that in fact, this is my own personal interpretation. It might not really represent the kind of the, how would you say, I'm not saying that it doesn't represent the Buddhist approach. It is the kind of, in some ways, the quintessence of Buddhism, but in a kind of the way, the manner in which I'm speaking of Tantra is of my own, from my own understanding. In that, when you really simplify the real contribution of Tantra, or the purpose of Tantra, is to really purify our perception. Purify our perception. Clear? Realizing that, in fact, the world that we live in is in fact created, or a part of what is known as a karmic vision, a part of a karma. Even though they may look very solid, very real, it's a part of our karmic vision. And that the reality of this is only real until this dream lasts. When this dream is over, when we wake up from this particular dream, then this is just a mere illusion, a display of our own karmic vision. In fact, in some ways, we are all in the same dream. You understand? And that, and also in that dream, maybe, I mean, I use the word dream, but isn't it interesting that when we are dreaming, the dreams are so real. We always take the dream very seriously. When we are dreaming. Only thing is when we come out of the dream, we don't remember, but sometimes I feel when we are dreaming, I think it could be sometimes even as real as this one. Only thing we don't remember afterwards. There's a kind of lapse of memory, isn't it? In the dream that all this is kind of real. And in that you do not really question what you dream, even though it just depends upon your own particular kind of karmic vision. You know, understand? In the same manner this is true, and is created by it. As a result, also many of us are conditioned by this, how do you say? And that's why in the teachings, sometimes it is said there are three visions. The impure vision of the beings like ourselves, the vision of experience, and the pure vision. Like that is to say, if I put it simply, these are known as the triple vision. Triple vision. That the us, you see, because of our ignorance and so on, we have the kind of impure vision of karma, karmic vision. Whereas a meditator or practitioner, because through the power of his or her practice, is able to transcend from that realm and has the what is known as vision of experience. Whereas someone who practices and realizes, becomes a Buddha or a realized being, has the complete pure vision. So in fact, we live in this kind of world of triple vision. And the whole goal is how to progress from this to purify our vision to reach the level of the pure vision. When you say pure vision, is to really reach to the inherent nature of the as-it-is of things, how really things are in reality. Not on its count, on a mere appearance level, but in absolute nature, to really understand. Because fundamental emphasis in Buddhism, as I mentioned to some of the people who were this afternoon, was that the whole point of Buddhism is to really understand the nature of mind. When you say nature of the mind, is also not exclusive to our mind alone. It is to really to understand the nature of our mind, means also to understand the nature of everything. In fact, something quite extraordinary, that in fact the modern physics, especially like the quantum theory, quantum physics and others, are beginning to actually show different facets of existence that we have not really realized before, that were all the time there. You know? In fact, this book that I'm writing, in one of the final chapters, chapter 21, there's a whole chapter called The Universal Process, in which I take the fundamental Buddhist principles related to art, to science, to Christianity, to Hinduism, you see, and then to the dream world, to the wake world, and to the death, and to the pathos, to see what is the connecting thread that is, you see, what is the connecting thread? Connecting thread is what is called the Trinity, the triple vision. I mean, this is again different triple vision, not the one I'm talking about. It's like the essence of the mind, the nature of mind, the compassion of mind. Anyway, I shall not talk about that because it might confuse you, and I have already successfully done it already. So therefore what I'm really saying is that the whole practice of the Tantra is to purify perception, to realizing that, you see, what we are perceiving is not something that is inherently real. It is only subject to our kind of karma. So that in order to purify, because it is in this impure perception that we really go through so much suffering. So that in one of the main practices of Tantra is to develop what is called the pure vision, or the purity of perception. On some masters translate as sacred outlook. Chogyam Trungpa translate this particular as sacred outlook. You understand? That is one. And later when I talk, these things will make more and more sense. Initially they're just points. And then another very important feature of the Tantra teachings is really the power of transmutation. The Tantric teachings and the Tantric practices are very powerful in transmuting our negative emotions, the negative states of mind. So the transmutation, purification and transmutations are the central and kind of, the most important feature of the Tantric teachings is transmutation, transformation, transmutation. Is it clear? In fact, if you start very simply, I'm starting very simply, like sometimes I'm starting a very kind of like teaching it on a ABC level. I find that, you see, it is possible to teach the most profound thing on an ABC level. I sometimes think that you can teach even children on a very simple level most profound things, if you really take the pains and, you know, take the thing to explain. So if you explain on that level, is that first of all, Tantra, the word Tantra, in Tibetan has a number of meanings. It means continuity, continuity. And also it means thread, continuity, continuity of energy. How was it explained by Tantra Rinpoche? Did you find Tantra?
Continuity.
Continuity, yeah. Continuity. And also sometimes thread. Some ways it's very interesting. It's like in this confusion, you know, like in this world of ours, the mind of ours is actually in a kind of like a, you know when you have those ball of, thread, it's all messed up. And in order to find, you need to find the beginning and the end of the thread, isn't it? In order to unlock it. In fact, that when you also say you thread the needle, threading the needle, to find the beginning, find something that we can work with, is the starting point. So that the starting point of the Tantra is the glimpse, and the glimpse is the glimpse is the glimpse of what is known as pure perception, which, if I put it, there is a deeper meaning of the glimpse of the nature of mind, glimpse of experience of the nature of mind, the shunyata, for example, experience. However, if not that, even on a very simple level, is to really to try to see things in a more pure way. Like, for example, generally speaking, see, we are all, in some ways, you see, kind of, how do you say, educated or trained or conditioned in such a way that we always look and see what's wrong. We don't often say what's right. In fact, Tantra teaches us to look what's right, not so much to emphasize on what's wrong. Because sometimes you see, if what you occupy your mind with, that kind of dominates it. If you want to really look something, like what's pure, what is good, you'll find plenty. If you want to look for what's wrong also, you can find plenty. It's kind of choices up to you. So in a sense, from a kind of a more healthy way, is to look and to see in a very positive way, to see, because Tantric is a very positive teaching. Because in Tantric teachings, everything is seen in very purely. See, everything is seen in purely in its inherent way. There's no kind of judgment. Everything is seen. Even such things which are normally considered something negative, such as anger, desire, all these negative emotions are also, in a Tantric teaching, not treated as something negative, but they're something workable, something usable, a material. Like, for example, the manure. You know manure?
Yeah.
Shit. Is something that you normally discard with, but if you use it where it's extremely fertile, so that the negative emotion is extremely fertile. They're very good, materials. Their nourishment is sometimes said for the indestructible energy of enlightenment. It's a very good, if you use it. And wonderful thing is we've got plenty. That's why it's so relevant. Because we have so much of it. And we don't know what to do with it. So how to work with it. And that's why the Tantric teachings are extremely appropriate. In fact, something quite interesting is that in the ancient times when the Buddha's teachings first came into being, there were more basic teachings, like talking about the Four Noble Truths, about the suffering, about the origin of suffering, the cessation and partly due cessation, the Eightfold Path, and then slowly the Mahayana teachings came. The Tantric teachings were really something extremely secret, because in those days people were managed with those basic teachings, were manageable. But then as the time became worse and worse and worse and worse, we became more and more, we manifested more and more neuroses. We became more, we became more and more powerful. We feed our negativity so strongly, they almost grown to great size. It's like almost with atomic power. So much so that you see that, we need a very powerful teaching to cut right through these, you see. You know what I'm saying? That's one of the reasons that even though these were secret teachings, why they are taught so now is because of desperation. In some sense, you can say desperation. Try anything, the last resort. But that in many ways, really, it's because as the time becomes more difficult, you need really more and more powerful method. So that's why one of the main teachings of the Tantra practice is to work with, to transmute. But in order to transmute, first you must have really, how do you say? I remember this afternoon I was comparing energy, because Tantric is also very much related with energy. The energy is something sometimes it's very extremely fluid. And I remember I was comparing this afternoon to the energy tour. Orchestra. Particularly if you're hearing it for the first time, because it has not a good word, you see, particularly if you're hearing it for the first time, because word emptiness has like a nihilistic connotation, something empty, but that's not what it's meant by. Empty means empty or free of grasping, empty or free of of limitation, of fixation. It means free, open like the sky is what emptiness is. That is to say, when we really, like, this is something again very difficult to talk about, frankly speaking. It's extremely difficult to talk about. Only way we can communicate is through some presence and through some experience. It is sometimes something that can only be communicated through experience, because in many ways it's something beyond word. Even it is said the Buddha, with all the power of his, you see, of his, how do you say it? The tradition is known as the Vajra speech. Even Buddha, with all his power, could not really speak of the truth directly. He only used an example. He said, the essence of the nature mind, he said, is open and spacious like the sky. He said, yet its nature is radiant like the sun. And his compassion is all-pervasive and unbiased and all-pervasive and penetrating like the sun's rays. So this embodies the essence, the nature, and the compassion of the energy. This is the fundamental trinity in Buddhism, in a sense. The fundamental, I just said, that all the three kayas, really, when you talk about Buddha or enlightenment as these three things embodied in kind of, when you realize these three things fully, when someone fully perfects this. At the same time, you see, since in the Buddhism, one of the most important or the fundamental base of Buddhism is that we all have, regardless of who we are, whether we're German, French, or English, or Dutch, or Tibetan, or Indian, whoever we are, Chinese or Japanese, we all have Buddha nature. And because we have the Buddha nature, therefore we have glimpses of it. Like because the sun is there, that's when the clouds go away, it shines. It's not a surprise. It's quite natural when the clouds go away, sun shines, because the sun is always there. In that manner, when the clouds of mind dissolve through the practice of meditation, because meditation sometimes creates a strong wind that blows away all the winds of a mind, of an ordinary mind, and revealing to us the sky-like essence of the nature of mind, and at the same time the sun-like, how do you say, nature of the compassion of the mind, and the, see, you understand? And so, so we could have a glimpses of this, the experience of that. In fact, when you work with Tantra, these glimpses are really the seeds or the materials that you would work with to, in order to, how do you say, to develop that in a sense. But then when you fully embody and realize, then you become a Buddha. It's called the three kaya embodied Buddha. And so, you see, now you see, when we're talking about this emptiness or shunyata, it's important to realize, I explain this quite clearly all the time, but what I'm really saying is that I don't hold back, you see. What I always do is I don't really hold back the teachings. And I kind of give teachings regardless, you see, whether I feel you'll understand or not, whether you're new or old or, I don't know. I really explain, because you never know. Someone here might understand. Sometimes we cannot say a new person, because a new person might understand better than an older practitioner. You never know. So that really, when you talk about this, is in Buddhism, like one of the fundamental principles, or the fundamental, if you call it philosophy. It's not a philosophy, in fact, it's really the basis of the view. It's called shunyata. In fact, one master, who I respect very much, he often says that Buddha gave one name for the nature of mind. That Buddha gave one name to describe the nature of mind. That name or that word is shunyata. Shunyata in Sanskrit, in Tibetan is tongbani, which in English is emptiness, but it's not so good anyway. What is the shunya? It's divided into two, shunya or tongba and ni or ta. which is emptiness. So that the empty, that the nature of mind, if you really look into the essence of mind, it is open, limitless, spacious, like the sky. That's why it's called empty, shunya, tongpa, sky. But that's the openness of the essence of the nature of mind. Is that clear? But yet, to catch the sleepers. But you see, we said that the nature of mind is like the sky. It's open spacious like the sky, but the nature of mind is not the sky. You see, what is the difference between the mind and the sky? Is the sky does not have the cognizance. Cognizance. Cognizance, you say? What is the Dutch word for cognizance? Kennen. Huh? Kennissen. Which is the clarity. In fact, when you're in the teaching, it's called clear light. That's actually that. Clear light is not light like that. That's a big mistake. When you talk about clear light, you think of some light coming. That's completely. The clarity of the mind is called clear light. In fact, this is something that I clarified again and again and again and again with many of my masters, including Sogyal. In this book, for this book, because what is really clear light. And so you see, when you say shunyata, shunya is the empty, that is to say, spacious, open, sky-like essence of the mind is the shunya. Yet it is not just empty. It is really, pregnant, or it is, it is endowed with the noble qualities of clarity, cognizance. That cognizance is what tais, shunyata is. That's why, in fact, the nature of mind, or like, for example, the shunyata is the indivisibility of emptiness and clarity, is what really emptiness is, what the nature of mind is. You understand? So, that, in fact, that when we actually practice the Tantra, that is after having, for example, been through the other levels of, the training, like through the meditation and through compassion, and one has a glimpse of the nature of mind, And from the nature of mind, as I said before, from the nature of that realization of absolute, the shunyata, the wisdom of absolute. In fact, the wisdom of absolute, as one great master put, is that absolute is beyond mind. That which is within the realm of mind is called relative. Absolute is beyond mind. That's why there's no word to describe. It is something that you directly experience. You understand? That absolute, that nature of mind, which we call shunyata or tongbani, when you have a glimpse of the nature of mind, that, and then from that, a deep compassion arises. Because as I said earlier, bodhicitta, the body is your enlightened essence, citta is the heart. When you really discover your enlightened mind, or enlightenment, then it radiates with its natural radiance. Like when there's a sun, there's warmth and rays. That's what compassion is. Compassion naturally rises. That's why that really the indivisibility of emptiness, or the shunyata and the compassion, is the basis of all. That's why when we do the practice of Tantra, that these are the two most important. Now, as we come into the actual practice, having established that, as we come into the practice of Tantra, remember I told you the most important thing about Tantra is to create, to develop pure perception of the sacred outlook and to effect what's called transmutation of a negative emotion. But then you might ask, what kind of practices are used? There are many, many practices used. I mean, it's really, Tantra it's one of the greater qualities of the Tantra. In fact, you see the Tantra teachings, like for example, Tantra teachings are also part of Mahayana. That's important. Because in Tantra, there are two types of what is called, there is the Sutra Mahayana and Tantric Mahayana. Both are Mahayana. That's why it is always qualified by compassion. The Tantra is always, you see, a part of Mahayana. You understand? And so in that, what is important is that even though the wisdom or the ultimate goal of the shunyata, the nature mind, is the same, but the Tantra is unique that it's endowed with many, many skillful methods. So that the Tantra is endowed with many, many skillful methods. That's one of the uniqueness of the Tantra. It's called Tap Monka Mepata. It's how would you say, it's kind of endowed with so many kind of, it's a bit like, you see, it's a bit like if I use an example. Let's use an opposite example. Before you used to Tibet and you know, how it was wonderful there and how it lacks here. Now you use the opposite. Like in Tibet, when you go, you have to either go on the horse or you have to walk. Now there are some roads, but which are still not so good. It takes very long to go anyway. But whereas here in Europe, you have all kinds of means, like bicycle. I mean, you have cars, you have planes, you have, you have even, how do you say, you have even Concords, and all kinds of means to travel quickly. So it's like Tantra is like that. There are all kinds of ways to travel, all kinds of means, all kinds of possibilities. There's choices of means. And that when you travel that way, there's not so much, how do you say, there's not so much effort. Only just going to the airport. And checking in and so on and so on. But actually the travel itself is sometimes quite simple. Particularly if you're going a short distance like in London or to Paris, so it's very simple. The moment you're just there, you're almost there already. So in many ways, the wonderful thing about Tantra is it's endowed with so many skillful methods. And so it has many methods, and one of the principal methods of the Tantra is, you see, there are three things. It works on the perception level, it works on the sound level, and it all works on the mind level. On the level of perception, to purify perception, the practice of visualization. Visualization. On the level of sound and energy, it works with mantra. On the level of mind, it works with what's called samadhi, which is deep meditation on the nature of Absolute. But these three things are actually connected together. In fact, in order to actually do mantra practice, you need the visualization as well as the power of the realization of the nature of mind. And you understand? They are all connected together, but these are. And so this afternoon, I explained quite extensively, I mean, as much as one could do in an afternoon's workshop, I explained quite thoroughly the visualization. At least how it is done, for example. And in that you see one of the main practices of the Tantra. So I will say a little bit about the visualization now, because that's one of the main practices. Where is the Giselle? Orange. You can just have a minute's break. Okay. So in the practice of visualization, main point of it is to actually purify our perception. And also to kind of, how would you say, you see, when we create the visualizations, it becomes actually real. When it becomes real, it becomes so real, like this reality. It becomes really like this. When it becomes real like this, then you begin to realize, because you know that the visualizations you just created. You understand? And so that's why, because this visualization is not real, one begins to understand, so therefore also this is not real. And an understanding dawns also. In fact, it is in the teachings it is often said that the whole point of the visualization practice is to visualization practice is to free us of the, how would you say, the belief in the reality of things. When we take things very seriously, even though sometimes we realize through the teachings and through practice that things are illusory, dreamlike, but yet that's very difficult for us to, how to say, really realize it. So that the practice of visualization actually affect that kind of, how do you say, a change of heart, a change of mind. And but thing is, but the point is that when you begin, this is what I was sharing a little bit this afternoon, maybe I think helpful for you, is that when we begin, maybe you've heard about these things, but when we begin the practice of visualization, because for many, there are some for whom visualization is easy, comes quite naturally, but there are others for whom visualizations are quite difficult. So there is actually really a method of actually training practitioners in the practice of visualization. This is something, sometimes it exists in the text, but really the method is something that masters at the hand down. That's why in the Tibetan tradition we very much emphasize on lineage, because the masters really pass the wisdom, knowledge to really students who are really, how would you say, really serious. I mean, in the books there are, but then it's a little bit hidden. You really need the key, the code words. Like sometimes everything is on the computer, but you need the code words. So in this is that, for example, the visualization, it might be helpful to know is first when you begin, even those for who visualization comes quite easily, it might be very difficult for you to really create the reality of the vision. So then you begin first, by the first level is very much just feeling the presence, like feeling the presence of the Buddha. Now also, you see, in the, that's why this is rather complicated, you see. That's I'm kind of reticent sometimes even to start it, but if you don't start, then, as you say, there is nothing that we can go on if you don't start on it. If you start, it's rather complicated, so why not start it anyway, even if it's complicated, you can start it. Because where does this whole, how would you say, this visualization come from? It comes from, in the tantric teachings, it works with, it directly working with your Buddha nature. It's your Buddha nature is used as the basis of visualization. It's like the Buddha nature there, you slowly blow it, you know, and make it to come into full being. And you generate your Buddha nature, to enhance your Buddha nature. When you have an experience of your Buddha nature to the practice of meditation, then you actually make that a reality. Because for the moment that's just a glimpse, because this is our ordinary perception, you see. And whole practice of visualization is to generate your Buddha, you actually assume a Buddha being, as opposed to an ordinary being. The ordinary being is replaced by the Buddha being. So when you do that, first, even before you can see yourself as the Buddha, or sometimes you begin first by invoking Buddha outside the wisdom man. And later, later, because in Tantra teaching there are many levels also, as I explained this afternoon. And that in the first, when you begin, sometimes you visualize the mandalas or the Buddhas outside of you, and you really, them being the embodiment of the wisdom beings, you see, and you receive the blessing and empowerment, it purifies you. Then it slowly brings you to the level of the Buddha. First level is you really consider yourself as being very inferior, and the Buddhas as very superior. Then slowly, as you receive the empowerment, the blessings, and through the purification and practices, you come to the level of being almost equal to the Buddhas. Realize that we're almost like relatives, brothers and sisters. And then slowly, when you reach the level of the more advanced level, one realizes that actually Buddha and us are in nature same. That's the yoga level, and so on and so on. But in all this, whether you visualize outside, whether you visualize yourself the deity, which is in the Anuttara Yoga Tantra, which is more advanced Yoga Tantras, in that when you do this practice, is first, before you can visualize clearly, you actually just, feel the presence, that just trust in nature, that you are the Buddha, and that you see, and particularly since you have that experience, that glimpse of the experience of nature mind as the basis, in that experience you kind of, you create. You understand? From out of it. But that's why in this practice is first you dissolve everything into a state of inherent purity. Dissolve. Then out of that tremendous compassion rises. This unity of compassion and then the wisdom of the shunyata is united together, gives birth to the deity, to the Buddha. So this one, you see, when you do first, you try to see, just to feel the presence first. And then what you do is you take a very good painting. That's why we have images. That's why we have paintings. In fact, that's why it's important to have a good painting, because maybe in some paintings the eyes are a little bit crooked or the mouth is a little bit crooked and not very helpful for your visualization. You should have a really perfect image. And you use that to look at that and then visualize and look into that and visualize, look into that, visualize. And you develop to such an extent that actually you're able to see clearly the form of the deity. To this detail, to the minute details of even the color of the eye, for example. And then particularly sometimes there are at the heart of the Buddha, there are like the mantras, the mantras, encircling, rotating, radiating tremendous zela. You have to even visualize each of the syllables very distinctly. So all this what is the point of visualizing this? Is that actually it's training of the mind. Because at the moment our mind is really restless. Remember I was saying this afternoon that I'm told recently that the scientists say that we all have each day 63,000 different thoughts. But only very few original. You only have few original thoughts every week. 63,000. And they all keep repeating, going around in circles. So that you see, when you look at your mind, it never stays, isn't it? Just always jumping out of so many different ways. And we can never bring our mind under control. We can never think a happy thought, or we can never do something to create, in some ways like we are subjected to our emotions. We are not in control of our emotions. We are just subjected to them. So that's why by practicing this way, we actually develop so that we can gain power over mind, so that we can put mind wherever we like. Saying, mind, you sit there and behave yourself for 2 hours. Okay, boss. And the mind sits there. Really, it's actually way. And then also develops agility. Agility, that is to say, develop flexibility. Like sometimes in the visualization, you create yourself as huge as a mountain, or as huge as a whole universe. The whole, your perceptions filled with this being. At the same time, and you see with all clarity, at the same time, you visualize it as small as a mustard seed, but with all the details exactly. All that is a training. In some ways, it's quite extraordinary science. That's why in some ways the Tantric Buddhism is really a science of mind. And then what happens is, then slowly, first you create the image through this, and then you see that image that you create in the mind, you have to make it real. It should not be like a painting flat. It should not be like an image static. It should not be like a human being with bone and flesh. In fact, it should be seen as a display of wisdom and compassion. Wisdom and compassion manifesting in form is what the manifestation of the deity is, or the Buddha is. And that in a sense is in the form of rainbow body, radiant and having the quality of wisdom, knowledge and compassion of all the Buddhas. And having the power. So you really make it real. So you practice that for a long, long time. Then you come to a point of real fruition. That is to say, fruition. Fruition, like for example, fruit, apple. Fruition. Like for example, apple. First you sow, then slowly it grows, slowly it grows, slowly it grows. Then you see, first it grows small, then finally it grows into full apple, and then what you can eat it. So that's why if you practice this way, there is the final level is the level when it comes into full power. When it comes to full power, then that time you can have miracles. That is what is called siddhi. At that time you receive the siddhi, you receive the accomplishment, the attainment. In fact, many of the great tantric masters known as siddhas, mahasiddhas. Mahasiddhas are the masters who will accomplish that through the power. Then you have really power. You have the vision, you can converse with Buddha. You can ask all the questions directly to them. It is really possible. There are many stories, many accounts. Not just stories, actual accounts of visions of people who normally do not fib. Have you ever heard that English word? It's a new English word, you must have called it fib. Fib is when you lie. It's a nice sweet way of saying lying. You know, when you lie, tell lies. When you tell tales, when you exaggerate a lot, when you tell tales and tell stories, it's called fib. It's kind of a more slang English. Must be a Dutch word, fib. What was the main thing about this afternoon's teaching? Remember? Most important figure. Peter Pan. That's later. We have to talk about Peter Pan. Alright, so anyway, in fact these are the masters who normally are really very truthful, very honest, you know, never exaggerate. They really, in their greatest humility, they have actually said. That's why sometimes the masters, their life stories, there's a whole what is called secret biography. There's the outer biography, which is more the activities. Inner biography is more about what they've learned and, you know, studies and these things. And then the secret biography is experiences, which are kept very secretly, but they don't really recount it. In the secret biographies, all accounts of the visions are all very clear. Like, for example, recently in South India, when his own Dalai Lama was giving teachings of the fifth Dalai Lama, he was recounting and giving us the transmission of all the visions of the fifth Dalai Lama, of the secret biography. So you see, when you come to that level, and when you come to that level, then you have a power of really transmutation on a very, very powerful level. Do you understand? That's how you see the visualization. Is this clear? And then when you create that kind of visualization, it's like you create almost reality. See? It's like almost you're making the truth a reality. You're making Buddha a reality. When you create that, what happens? Negative emotions come automatically or simultaneously or naturally transmuted and purified. I don't know. I think I'll stop there. When you ask me questions, that probably is better. Ask me questions and then I can try to answer. Perhaps then we can go into areas where you might like to hear more, further. I would suggest that perhaps what I taught this afternoon, if you have the possibility of listening to the tape, it would be good for those of you interested to listen to that tape because it gives a little bit more explanation. Tell me, who had the questions? Yourself and yourself. The two ladies. First I saw you and then you. Please, Lorraine.
I just have one question. What is the function of the sound of the mantra? When the visualization is working, it is almost like the visual of the mantra is much more strong than the sound. What is the function of the sound?
What is the function of the sound?
More or less the same question.
More or less same question. Let's ask.
Well, what do you do with mantra?
Yes, it's strange. You should ask the same question. Yeah. It's good. The thing is, whereas the mantras, in fact, the quite extraordinary thing of the mantra is that just as you see, mantras are actually said to be the truth in the form of sound. They capture, like for example, many of the Buddhas, they have a mantra. The mantras actually represented that particular Buddha in the form of sound. Like for example, this very great master in the Buddha, Padmasambhava, his mantra, which is very much my inspiration. You see, when you say the Bandhangur mantra, it's like his whole being comes into you. And when you say the mantra, you see, the mantra, when you say the mantra, when you chant, what happens? You're using your breath, the prana. You're charging your breath, prana, with the mantra. And the mantra goes through all the subtle channels and resonating and creating the transformation. And this is something quite extraordinary. I have had time and time and time again. Really, this is extraordinary. A very quick way of bringing transformation. Quick way. Particularly for those of you who are slightly, sometimes when you're about to meditate, you're rather nervous or you're a little bit, how do you say, disoriented, you're a little bit nervous. For such persons, you can begin by a mantra practice. It gets completely, how would you say, transforms your energy. It's very powerful. I mean, this is something that has happened to me many, many times. This I really have, how do you say, I really have a direct experience of the truth of the validity and the power of the mantras. In fact, I shall chant a mantra. Can you make sound a little deeper? Deeper. Now, for example, myself also, if I look into my energy before and then after the mantra, I'll tell you daily, I honestly, let's use myself as an experiment. Okay, on science of the human. And I tell you honestly, it actually really brings a change, real change in your energy, in your motion, in your atmosphere of your mind. Really, it's really extraordinary. Even now, you see, it's really been a change, a really noticeable change. In fact, the definition of mantra is, you can repeat after me, that which protects the mind is called a mantra. That which protects the mind from negativity is called mantra. Dalai Lama said that. In many ways, it's like that which protects you from your own mind is called mantra. Mantra is a protection. In fact, in this book that I have written, I've just explained also the Vajraguru mantra, and I've also explained the mantra a little bit. That's why the chanting is used a lot in the Tibetan Buddhism. It's very interesting. The Tibetan Buddhism is something known as mantrayana. The Tantra is what the West people call it. Actually, the Tibetan Buddhists themselves don't call themselves as a Tantra, we are Tantric practitioners. They call themselves mantrayana practitioners. In fact, the Tibetan called Sangha. Sangha means Sang is secret. Ha is mantrayana. And the full name is Secret Mantra Vajrayana. For example, you see, that's why the chant is used a lot. And chant, also if you chant in a very inspiring way, particularly in the Dzogchen tradition, very much if you chant in a very inspiring way, it has really power to kind of transform. Like, for example, I will teach you a chant now, okay? This is the chant that is from the tradition of the Tibetan Book of the Day, which I've been also sharing a little bit this afternoon. First I'll do, then you can join me. It's going to be on the basis of la 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 la. You don't have to know any words. La 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 la. La 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 la. I find that in the Tibetan, just as in the Tibetan chant, there's a very much a way of using the breath to go into you in such a different way. Because sometimes the mouth shapes change also, and it is really very powerful. It brings, like this chant is extremely inspiring. This is something that recently I found. I'm very happy to say that my students, have actually got how to chant this particular chant. It's really the authentic chant. If I do it a little bit higher. La 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 Anyway, it's nice chant. Urjena Jonta Pema Geza Dombosa Yonson Jungu Pema Jonesis Cordon Cando Mambe Coche Jason Daduci Sangelo Jesus Guru Pemas Urjena Jonta Pema Geza Dombosa Yonson Jungu Pema Jonesis Cordon Gando Mambe Coche Jason Daduci Guru Pemas. So you see very much the chant and the mantra, especially if you chant in a very inspiring way, in a very deep and a profound way, with the view, you put your mind in a state of meditation, and then if you chant it, it's an extraordinary power of transformation. Then there are also mantras for different purposes. So for all kinds of purposes, there are different mantras. Okay, that's the answer to that. In fact, if you want to chant once again the mantra. Om silence of the meditation mantra. You just go out and rest. Mind settles in a much deeper way. So, any other question?
My question was really when the visualization is very clear and you actually see the mantra, but what is the function of sound at that point?
No, but the sound is almost, how would you say, in the visualization, that on the level of the visualization, when you see the mantra clearly, but then you actually sound the mantra, you do it, and to really make the mantra, how do you say, activate. It is through the visualization and through the mantra that you bring the activity. You know. In fact, Tantra is the main thing. It's not just practicing yourself. You bring about activity. You transform the world, environment, and you work through the radiating. Like from the mantra mala, tremendous rays of light come and purify the environment being. Sometimes 5 color rays of light go. These are, for example, through the chanting the mantra. Sometimes also, it's not chanting in a deep way, but also saying it silently, like sometimes you go like a beehive, or sometimes also in silent way. Sometimes certain mantras are said so secretly, it's said it should not go beyond your collar. That sound shouldn't go beyond your collar. And sometimes the mantras you recite also mentally. That's why sometimes some of my students who, when you're working your work, I tell them not to recite the mantra loudly at your job. Because particularly if your boss is not so open, might, give you the honor of the boot. Or else also, if you even worse, the people, and if they think, so therefore just don't know your lips at all. That's why I say prayers each time I go on the plane. Because then I look around. Then any other question?
Can you explain a little more about compassion as ways of receiving?
Well, this one, my dear, is the whole teaching on that. In fact, what would be good is if you can, for example, we have a little group here in what's this place? Amsterdam, in Holland, and that in fact there is this material from the book on the chapter on compassion. I would make it available for the group as a study material also, so you can use that. Understand? Then it's explained very clearly. Okay. Because you need a food treatment. Yes.
One of the promises of this seminar, which you might not know about, was that you would talk about the teaching being applied in daily life in the West.
Yes.
Could you do something about that?
Yes. I did it already this afternoon.
Now? Oh.
Yeah, but I'll do it again. What did I say? I forgot.
Yeah.
No, I think this is a good point. The thing is this, you see. The thing is, that you see, what I'm saying is that what I said this afternoon also, is that something quite extraordinary is as you come now, you see, I, for example, myself, I've lived in the West for about 20 years. And I always go back every year to India to see my masters, but I've been living here doing these practices. Once you've done this practice, and when you come back to life again, when you come back from the practice to here, what happens? Your whole vision has changed. You begin to see things more purely. You begin to see people even more purely. In fact, in the teaching it is said, in the post-meditation, like the visualization practice, I want you to regard all beings as the Buddhas, all sound as the mantra, all thought as the wisdom nature. But in a very basic way, that when you've done the practice of visualization in a good way, you begin to see the